this is a difficulty, a challenge, which needs government response.
The Fed is really pleading for fiscal relief. I believe it's essential.
The American administration is about to change, but the clock will not simply be rewound.
How fast could we go to underserved communities and pull people into the middle class for the first time?
There's a period of, I think, great uncertainty and great risk.
Our city need to be ready for the convergence of the physical and digital worlds.
We need to use our recovery stimulus to invest in the clean and digital technologies of the future.
The question is, what direction are we pointing our economies? We're going to point towards sustainable growth.
It's the most important mindset to break, is that there's a trade-off between a green recovery and an economic prosperity.
Welcome. I'm Carol Masser. We're looking back at the 2020 Bloomberg New Economy Forum. Now in its third year, this annual summit brings together leaders in business, politics, and policy from around the world to discuss the most pressing issues facing the global economy. Now, due to one of those issues, the COVID-19 pandemic, the 2020 event was held as a virtual town hall, and it focused on the challenges of rebuilding a new economy in the wake of the virus crisis, one that's inclusive and sustainable for all. To lead us through the program, here's my Bloomberg colleague and forum co-host, Scarlett Fu.
Thanks, Carol. The coronavirus pandemic is the single biggest threat to the health of the global economy, and many believe it's exposed a deep sickness in society: inequality. Central banks have devised policies to keep capital markets liquid and prop up asset prices. But can these institutions use their tools to build a more equal society? Former Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen and former Bank of England Governor Mervyn King discussed the challenge.
Monetary policy has its limits, and the effective lower bound is a serious constraint. And the notion that the Fed can do all that is required at this point to support the economy is just wrong. And the Fed is really pleading for fiscal relief. I believe it's essential. I think the Fed has been less successful in lending to smaller businesses. That creates an impression of unfairness that the Fed is on the side of big companies and on Wall Street. This is something that's very difficult to accomplish. But, you know, as Chair Powell says, the Fed can't spend, it can't give grants, it can't direct aid to where it's needed to unemployed workers, and fiscal policy has a very important role to play now as well.
Lord King, I know you've echoed some of what Janet Yellen has said in repeatedly saying central banks can't do everything. Do you think they've played the expectations game well in responding to the crisis, or have they set them too high?
So I share much of what Janet has said, but I think to explain what's gone wrong, I don't think central banks have explained clearly why expanding the money supply is the right sort of response to a shutdown of the economy created by governments, different levels of governments, in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19. This isn't a conventional recession. And as Janet said, the most important thing for central banks to do now is to say that this is a difficulty, a challenge, which needs government response, not central bank response. And I don't think it's government response in the sense of general fiscal easing. I think it's a response that's required to support businesses until we get through this COVID-19 episode, at which point we can then let the market economy decide which businesses will thrive and which will fail, which I don't think we can do at present.
Private companies will also play a critical role in shaping a more equitable economy. IBM Executive Chair Ginny Rometty sized up the task ahead.
This is something we got involved in about a decade ago, and it was for the reason that you could begin to see the digital economy would not be inclusive. There would be far too many have-nots versus haves, and this would revolve around having the right skill to work in a new job and have it quick enough. And so, as you see with COVID, and then with all the issues around racism and systemic racism that have evolved, this has just escalated this issue that was, as the minister said, on a slow burn. So what we set out and coined a term new collar, so it would have a positive connotation. We said we had to offer a new pathway for people into our company, not just a traditional 4-year degree. And so new collar was meant to be, you could start, it wasn't white collar, it wasn't blue collar, and those connotations with it. It would be about a new collar job so that you could start without a 4-year degree. And there are many new jobs that live at this intersection with technology, cloud computing, cyber skills, that you could get started. And what you'd have to believe as an employer is in 3 different paradigms. And I think in some ways, Jason, this would be my definition of a new social contract. One would be, I would have to hire based on skills first versus degrees only, meaning I'd hire you because you had some skills that you had built in some way. The second paradigm is I'd have to offer a new pathway. The minister used that word as well. So in other words, perhaps you've come from a 6-year high school, which is what hopefully we'll talk about. We got very involved around the world in this. And then the third paradigm would be, as an employer, I offer you employability. While I may not guarantee you employment, I can offer you employability, meaning the ability to constantly build the skills that you can have a very good job. Because the issue here is going to become quality jobs, not just any type of job. So that led us down a path of what is a public-private partnership with high schools and community colleges around the world to build and say, how fast could we go to underserved communities and pull people into the middle class for the first time? And we now have a pipeline of almost 200,000 students coming through.
COVID-19 has forced nations to physically isolate. It's also exacerbated geopolitical rivalries. U.S.-China relations are as strained as they've been in decades, even as the two sides signed a Phase 1 trade deal at the start of the year. With a new U.S. president set to take charge in January, prominent voices in business and politics shared their views on the path forward for the superpowers.
The American administration is about to change, but the clock will not simply be rewound.
But unless there is some basis for some cooperative action, the world will slide into a catastrophe.
We shouldn't accept or assume that it's all going to be bad without working to make it better. We got to try to, we got to give the new administration a chance to articulate an approach.
I hope that he will be able to focus his mind on developing a framework for an overall constructive relationship with China, because the last 4 years have been quite a tumultuous ride.
We should build an open world economy that works for all. We must firmly safeguard the multilateral trading system under the WTO and unequivocally reject unilateralism and protectionism.
When your economy becomes, so big and your interests are all over the world, you have to protect your own interests.
I don't think we're going into a world of deep protectionism going forward. I see more regionalism.
I don't think there's a big bang win here for either side.
Coming up, we continue our review of the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. Ray Dalio says investing will look very different in a post-crisis world.
There are worlds that will be orderly and will prosper in this kind of an environment, and you could see it.
And ECB President Christine Lagarde warns policymakers about financial spillover.
We need to really stay clear of that because that would be an aggravating factor.
This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to our review of the 2020 Bloomberg New Economy Forum. I'm Carol Masser. The global economy will undoubtedly be different when the world emerges from the COVID-19 pandemic. How it changes will largely depend on how leaders in government, business, and finance work together to rebuild it. Those leaders had plenty to say at the forum. Scarlett Fu has more from our program.
Thanks, Carol. Even before the coronavirus pandemic struck, regime change was underway in the world of investing and finance. Now it's happening even faster. Ray Dalio has been preparing to navigate these choppy waters for a long time. He explained how his firm, Bridgewater, is adapting its portfolio strategy.
There's a period of, I think, great uncertainty and great risk. And so I think there are three words: diversification, liquidity, and then differentiation. We want to make sure that our investors are not just concentrated in some of the traditional markets. So diversification of how to do that well can reduce risk without reducing opportunity. And that means currency diversification, including the reserve currencies, how much exposure is to the reserve currencies, but it means currency diversification, asset class diversification, country diversification, and that should be the starting point of portfolios. In terms of liquidity, it allows you the flexibility to change as circumstances change. And differentiation is the most important consideration now. There are two different worlds. There are worlds that will be orderly and will prosper in this kind of an environment, and you could see it. And that differentiation versus other worlds and markets related to that, that will be bankrupt and disorderly. That kind of differentiation is important.
As president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde will play a critical role in the EU's recovery post-crisis. She discussed the potential for a COVID-19 vaccine by early next year and a key challenge facing policymakers.
I think that the second wave that we saw presents risks. The first risk that I would think of is the fact that consumers, investors, employers do not regard the pandemic as a one-off, this V-shape that we all aspired to, but as something that will recur over the course of time, and as a result would lead them to completely change their behavior. In other words, how about if they start saving again for precautionary purposes? How about if they continue to freeze and hold their investment plans because of the uncertainty generated by this situation? And the second risk that I see is the potential real/financial spillover, which we have managed to avoid so far. So in other words, we have not had the financial sector amplifying the downside that has weighed on the real economy, and we need to really stay clear of that because that would be an aggravating factor.
A portion of the New Economy Forum was devoted to the challenges facing cities. Urban economies have been hit hard during the pandemic, but civic leaders are responding with creativity and tenacity, reinventing the modern metropolis. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi shared his views on the future of cities.
We are looking at a future where a major chunk of education, healthcare, shopping, food experiences may happen online. Our cities need to be ready for the convergence of the physical and digital worlds.
Of course, cities have had to confront public health threats for centuries. Here's a look at how lessons learned from previous pandemics may help with the global recovery from COVID-19.
Humanity has faced the challenge of deadly disease for thousands of years. And whenever a new pandemic takes hold, civilizations adapt in response. In the 19th century, cholera epidemics in Europe set off an outcry for investment in modern sanitation and urban renewal. The movement sparked Baron Haussmann's transformation of Paris into the City of Light, trading crowded slums for wide, tree-lined boulevards and monuments lit by gas lamps. Haussmann's modernization prompted cities all over the world to follow suit. London added sewage systems, and New York built Central Park, adding a reservoir and green space for city dwellers to take in fresh air. At the turn of the 20th century, tuberculosis swept through the US, creating a greater need for urban parks and bringing light and air into building designs. The 1918 flu pandemic led to the invention of the radiator, with steam heating systems designed to allow windows to be left open, even during winter months, for improved ventilation. COVID-19 has already intensified a push by cities around the world to reduce pollution by adding bike lanes, pedestrian walkways, and implementing building design changes. Paris is pioneering the idea of a 15-minute city, creating walkable communities of shops, schools, and clinics, reducing the necessity of cars or public transport. In the distant past, it took decades for pandemics to leave their mark on our city's urban design and architectural landscape. Well, the changes sparked by this COVID-19 are already taking shape.
Coming up, more from the Bloomberg New Economy Forum. BlackRock's Larry Fink sees momentum building to combat the climate crisis.
We were beginning to see the tsunami of change already from the private sector.
And with vaccines on the horizon, Bill Gates discusses how COVID can be conquered. This is Bloomberg.
Welcome back to our review of the 2020 Bloomberg New Economy Forum. I'm Carol Massar. Climate change poses risks to the global economy that could ultimately cause deeper and more permanent damage than COVID-19. For more on the discussion of climate change and the green economy at the forum, here's Scarlett Fu.
Thanks, Carol. Leaders in business, finance, and government at the New Economy Forum made the case for a green recovery to repair the economic damage from the pandemic, and they expressed optimism that it can be done.
This is about capitalizing on existing market forces, not fighting them. We need to use our recovery stimulus to invest in the clean and digital technologies of the future, to make our economies more resilient and our societies and job markets fairer.
This is an opportunity to both address the problems that will come out of this crisis, to restart growth, to put the global economy not just on a higher growth trajectory, but also on a much more sustainable growth trajectory. So going forward, and we do hear countries announcing plans to step up action on the climate front. And so I am hopeful that much more will be done. But 2021 is the year when this should happen.
It is Unilever's profound belief that purpose and sustainability are a pathway to better financial performance. There is no trade-off. And we're already seeing that money that gets invested in green stimulus seems to generate a better ROI than the more broad stimulus packages. So it's the most important mindset to break, is that there's a trade-off between a green recovery and an economic prosperity.
In 2020, we saw at BlackRock more than a doubling of investments towards climate change. And the inquiry we're having from U.S. companies, U.S. foundations, globally, we're seeing a change. So we were beginning to see the tsunami of change already from the private sector. And now with the potential of having a Biden administration, I think we're going to need the government to come along and help us on this journey.
Former Bank of England Governor Mark Carney has shifted his focus from monetary policy to climate policy. He's working with the UK government and the United Nations on climate action and finance. Carney told Bloomberg's Alex Steele there's no time to waste in this effort.
We need to invest now. I mean, we're touch wood, we're going to be coming out of the health and economic crisis. The question is, what direction are we pointing our economies? We're going to point towards sustainable growth. Huge investment. You rightly started with that, Alex. Huge numbers for investment that's capital intensive. It's job heavy. Having that information now so companies and investors can put money to work is critical.
So what role then does policy play in that? We just had an election, obviously, here in the U.S. What's the role of public policy?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple roles. One, and I wouldn't understate this first bit, is set the direction. So one of the planks of President-elect Biden's platform was the U.S. is going to move to 100% clean energy and net zero by 2050. So you set the direction. Secondly, you put in place the frameworks that are necessary, that information for investors to make the decision, and you also have credible regulatory policy. So you're showing the direction of the economy more hydrogen, zero emission vehicles, moving towards electrifying more of the economy and moving the electricity sector and generation towards renewables. All of those things send signals to investors, provide the information as well, and gets money moving. So that's what government has to start with: the objective, fill in with the framing, and then candidly get out of the way so the private sector figures out where to go.
Investors around the world are demanding green investments. But what exactly does green mean? Guggenheim's Scott Minerd addressed this issue from an investor's perspective.
Very little time is being spent on trying to set economic incentives. Until the private sector has economic incentives to get there, the reality is that everybody will continue to act in what they think is their best interest. And right now, a great organization like HSBC, who's made a huge commitment and is way ahead of the curve, can be negatively impacted if they move too aggressively when other people decide they're going to take advantage of the fact that HSBC has changed their policies.
So do you think that this is something that needs harmonization, like in a way that we bring more groups together to sort of set targets? Is this a policymaker's question? Like, who's going to be the prime mover on making this come together in a way that's beneficial for everyone?
Well, I think it's all of the above. I think the policymakers need to look at this and understand that there are incentives that can be put in place which basically don't cost anything for the governments. But two, I think the investment community in the broad sense should be getting together and discussing this issue to try to be develop a uniform standard about a baseline for what the objectives are, what the definitions are, and what the rules of the road are.
The Bloomberg New Economy Forum also featured sessions on infectious disease research, public health, and the progress of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A conversation with Bill Gates touched on several of these critical issues, including the prospects for eliminating, not just controlling, the coronavirus.
We don't know enough yet to say, can we do the elimination of this? That would be the best, because then zero is magical, because it just doesn't spread at all. It doesn't come back. I think there's a good chance we can do that, but we'll have to look at the vaccines, how good they are at blocking transmission. Because this is a super spreader disease, it is likely we can do that. Otherwise, we'll have to maintain immunity on an indefinite basis, which probably means booster shots. And a little bit, as people come into the country, do they have a digital certificate that says whether they've been vaccinated or not, which that's fairly complex and will need for a period of time, like we've tried to do with yellow fever. But as the U.S. rejoins the WHO, this idea of what does the vaccine certificate look like, hopefully that dialogue will begin.
Visit Bloomberg.com to see much more from the 2020 New Economy Forum. Bloomberg subscribers can access NEF Go on the terminal for complete coverage. I'm Scarlett Fu. Carol, back to you.
Thanks, Scarlett. And thanks to all the participants who made the Bloomberg New Economy Forum a success. As the world continues to battle the pandemic, we hope it will help inspire the practical solutions and innovative actions needed for an inclusive, sustainable economic recovery. I'm Carol Massar. Stay safe, everyone. This is Bloomberg.